very, very early on the Wednesday morning between the death and the funeral. And I just sat down and wrote it, and it took about an hour and a half, and just came pouring out, really. Actually, it's interesting. Sounds rather sort of bizarre, but I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel a sort of positive energy come through, that somehow she approved of what I was going to say.
The evening before the most-watched funeral of the 20th century, Charles Spencer walked alone through a quiet room to his sister's coffin. He unfolded a eulogy he had only finished writing hours earlier and read every single word aloud, not to a crowd, not to a camera, but to Diana herself. He has confirmed this personally. He visited her the day after he finished writing it, and he read it to her in full. Hold that image for a moment. A brother rehearsing the most politically charged speech in modern royal history to the only person in the world who would never be able to hear it. Because nearly 3 decades later, that same man found himself staring at a glossy documentary proposal bearing 3 names: Netflix, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle. And he responded with exactly 4 words. Is this a joke? 4 words? That is all it took to bring the entire Sussex media machine to a grinding halt. And tonight, I am going to show you precisely why those 4 words may turn out to be more destructive to Harry and Meghan than anything King Charles or Prince William has ever said or done. Here is my promise to you, and you know I keep them. By the time this video ends, you will have 3 complete answers. First, what was actually inside that pitch? The specific requests that caused Diana's brother to recoil the moment he read them. Because once you understand what they were asking for, the private diaries, the home footage, the house itself, his reaction will make complete and total sense. Second, the deeply personal secret that explains everything about this man. A private guilt Charles Spencer has reportedly carried since the 1990s. A wound that quietly transformed him into the most uncompromising guardian of Diana's legacy in all of Britain, and the reason this particular proposal didn't just offend him. It felt to him like history attempting to repeat itself. Third, the private letter he is said to have written afterward, not addressed to Harry, not to Meghan, but to Prince William, a letter that royal insiders are describing not as an emotional response, but as strategy, one that may fundamentally redraw the battle lines of this entire family conflict. 3 threads. I will close every single one of them before we are done in that exact order. That is the agreement between you and me. But none of this lands with its full weight until you truly understand who Charles Spencer is. Because this man has remained so deliberately in the background for so long that most of the public has genuinely lost track of just how significant he is. Charles Spencer is 62 years old. He is the youngest brother of the late Diana, Princess of Wales, and the 9th Earl Spencer, the current head of a family that has held its name and its land for 5 unbroken centuries. If you remember him at all from recent years, you likely remember him as a quiet figure in the background of royal occasions. But there was one afternoon, September 1997, Westminster Abbey, when he stepped into the foreground in front of a global audience estimated at roughly 2 billion people, and delivered a eulogy that did something no one had ever dared to do at a royal ceremony. He challenged the royal family, directly to their faces, with the monarch's mother and the future kings of England seated just feet away from him. He stood at that podium and made a promise, on behalf of what he called Diana's blood family, that her sons would be raised with warmth and with imagination, shielded from the cold institutional rigidity that had, in his view, suffocated his sister. He vowed to protect William and Harry from the same relentless torment that had driven Diana to her final moments in that Paris underpass. People still remember the extraordinary moment when applause from the crowds outside rolled through the Abbey doors like a wave. What history tends to forget is that the speech was never really a eulogy at all. It was a vow. And Charles Spencer has spent every year since that afternoon honoring it, quietly, deliberately, and without any interest in public recognition for doing so. Now here is the detail that almost everyone misreads, and it changes everything. When Diana died, the universal assumption was that she would be buried among royalty, a royal vault, royal terms, the palace deciding the where, the when, and the how. That is what everyone expected. That is not remotely what happened. Diana was buried at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate in Northamptonshire, the house where she grew up, where she learned to ride, where she became the woman the world came to love, on land her family has owned and protected for 500 years. Strip away the sentiment and say it plainly, her brother refused to surrender her to the institution, even in death. The royal family received the funeral, the Spencers kept Diana. And from that day forward, anyone who wanted access to the private Diana, the authentic one, the letters, the film. Reels, the childhood rooms, the personal archive, had to come through a single man. A man who had already told 2 billion people exactly where he stood on the matter of institutions claiming ownership of his sister. Before we go any further, try this thought experiment because it will make everything that follows sharper. Imagine Diana's legacy as a great museum. The world has full access to the postcards, the iconic gowns, the famous headlines, the endlessly replayed television clips, the photographs reproduced on a million magazine covers. Anyone can print those, and heaven knows everyone has. But the originals, the handwritten letters, the unedited family film, the rooms she actually lived in, the ground where she actually rests, all of that exists within a single private collection managed by a single curator who alone decides what gets displayed and what stays locked away. Every Diana documentary you have ever watched was built from postcards. The curator has never once loaned out the originals. So ask yourself honestly, what would it actually take for him to open that collection for the very first time? What degree of trust? What clarity of purpose? What absolute guarantee that his sister's memory would be honored rather than consumed? Hold your answer in mind, then watch who came to the door and what they brought with them. And here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming, and once I tell you this next part, you will not be able to look at any of it the same way again. It started as these things so often do with something small, something shiny, something that on the surface seemed entirely innocent. The jewelry. At the evening reception following the royal wedding in 2018, Meghan Markle appeared wearing Diana's aquamarine ring, that large, pale blue stone the entire world recognized on sight. And in that first moment, if you were Charles Spencer watching from a distance, it probably felt rather moving. Someone new, someone his nephew clearly loved, choosing to carry a piece of Diana into her wedding night. It felt like remembrance, it may even have felt like family. Then came the butterfly earrings, then the Cartier tank watch, then the gold bracelets. Item by item, occasion by occasion, each piece that had once belonged to Diana began reappearing on Meghan, and always at precisely the events where photography was not merely possible but guaranteed. And to be fair, fairness always matters here. No one can prove the intentions were anything other than genuine. Grief does complicated things inside families, but patterns are patterns. Every major Meghan public moment seemed to arrive with a piece of Diana attached to it, once as a tribute, twice as a habit, every single time as a strategy. You do not need a palace source to see it, you only need eyes. Keep the word strategy close because the jewelry was only the opening act. March 2021, the Oprah interview. The whole world remembers it, but I want you to picture how Charles Spencer reportedly watched it alone at Althorpe. Critics analyzed that broadcast carefully afterward. What they found was not accidental staging. The lighting was low and golden. The setting was soft and confessional. The central theme, a young woman silenced by an institution that ignored her pain, her cries for help dismissed, left isolated with no exit except the public. Any serious royal watcher felt the chill of recognition immediately, because that is almost frame for frame the architecture of Diana's 1995 Panorama interview. Run the comparison yourself. 1995, a royal wife isolated, speaking of an institution deaf to her suffering, going directly to the public through one trusted interviewer, hushed lighting, confessional stillness. 2021, identical on every single point, identical. The one element that changed tells you everything. Diana gave her interview while still trapped inside the system with everything to lose and nowhere to go. The 2021 version was filmed from a California villa after the exit with a full production team attached. The original was a cry for help. Whatever else you believe about the remake, it was a launch. Then came the Netflix documentaries, the confessional pieces to camera, and with them a story built for global export, a couple hunted by the same establishment and press that destroyed Diana, the same machine, a new generation. This time the heroine escaped. As storytelling, it is compelling. As a business model, it is brilliant. But for the man who watched his sister's real anguish get harvested in real time by people who never cared whether she survived it, this was beginning to look horribly familiar. The earrings had felt like remembrance, this felt like repetition. Let me offer you a frame that most royal commentary never uses, because I think it is the most honest one available. Brand licensing. Strip out the emotion and examine the assets. After stepping back from royal duties, Harry and me. Meghan had fame with an expiry date and one asset more valuable than everything else combined. Diana, her image, her myth, her martyrdom. In business terms, the Sussexes had been trading on a brand without a license. Because the actual licensor, the keeper of the archive, the controller of the estate, the owner of the originals, was a 62-year-old man in Northamptonshire whom nobody had thought to consult. Every ring worn on camera, every panorama echo, Every hunted like Diana framing was an unauthorized withdrawal from the Diana account. And here is the thing about unauthorized withdrawals. They work perfectly right up until the moment you need the bank manager to approve a loan. Because by early 2026, the Sussex operation had hit a wall. The Spotify deal had already collapsed. The lifestyle venture was underperforming. The entire California project needed something enormous, something that would justify the Netflix relationship and remind the world why Harry and Meghan still mattered. And so, in some development meeting, someone produced the idea. A grand anniversary documentary for 2027, Diana, 30 years after Paris, 30 years of grief, 30 years of unanswered questions, an emotional, cinematic, definitive Diana film fronted by her own son. Netflix reportedly loved it immediately. But the element that made the pitch truly irresistible to the people selling it was this. They reportedly wanted to draw an explicit line between Diana's war with the establishment and Meghan's war with the same forces. Diana's halo formally transferred, Meghan positioned as the 21st century continuation of the story. Bold, certainly ambitious, wildly. And it carried one catastrophic, structurally unfixable problem. They needed Charles Spencer. Because here is what the project reportedly required, and this is the answer to the first loop I opened at the start of this video. They wanted Althorpe itself as the backdrop. The private family archives, Diana's personal handwritten diaries, home movies never seen publicly, the unguarded footage, the real, private Diana that no one outside the Spencer family has ever touched. Without those things, it is just another documentary assembled from recycled news clips. With them, it is the definitive Diana film of the century. And there is exactly one living person who controls every item on that list. So the proposal went to Charles Spencer, and by all indications, they genuinely expected him to say yes. You can understand the logic from the outside. It looks like a cinematic love letter with a streaming budget, exactly the sort of tribute a devoted brother ought to welcome. But that is not what Charles Spencer saw when he read it. He saw the role Meghan was scripted to play, he saw where the halo was being moved to, and the moment he understood what the project truly served and what it truly sold, he gave the response that has since passed into royal legend. Is this a joke? When this particular man calls your project a joke, those words carry the weight of 30 years. And just like that, the people who had built an entire documentary around Diana's legacy discovered they had no Diana left to build it around. No house, no diaries, no film reels, no license. Now for the second loop, the one I have been holding back. Because this is the part that transforms Charles Spencer from a stubborn aristocrat into something far more human and far more immovable. Why is this man so absolute? The answer is guilt. A very specific guilt, reportedly carried since 1997. According to long-standing accounts, it was Charles Spencer himself who first introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, the journalist behind the Panorama interview. The same interview the world now knows was obtained through forged documents and deliberate psychological manipulation. Diana in the mid-1990s was isolated, frightened, and genuinely vulnerable. Someone arrived with fabricated paperwork designed to convince her that the people around her were betraying her, that her only safe move was to sit in front of a camera and bleed for the nation. Her vulnerability was not incidental to that broadcast. Her vulnerability was the product. And her younger brother had, by these accounts, unwittingly held the door open. When the full truth about how that interview was engineered finally surfaced, it reportedly hit Charles Spencer like a landslide. It meant he had played a part, however innocent, in one of the most profound exploitations of his sister's life. Think about what that does to a person. Every year since has been, by every account, an act of quiet atonement. The sealed diaries, the unseen footage, the refusals, decade after decade, to let anyone monetize the archive. He has been ensuring, with the single-mindedness of a man doing penance, that nothing like Panorama can ever happen to Diana again, even in death. And in doing so, he has achieved something almost no famous figure of the modern era has been ranted. He has protected Diana's mystery. There is a private Diana the world has never consumed, and she exists only because one man keeps saying no. So now run the tape again, and this time put yourself in his chair. You are Charles Spencer. Almost 30 years of atonement for one introduction. You have turned down every network, every publisher, every offer because you watched what happened the last time the gate was left open. And now a proposal lands on your desk asking for the diaries written in your sister's own hand, the home movies of her as a girl on the lawns of Althorpe, the island where you buried her, all of it to serve a story that ends not with Diana but with Meghan Markle wearing her halo. You know the financial pressure behind the pitch. You can calculate to the decimal point what your sister's private pain is worth to these people. What do you say? Honestly, the only surprise is that he kept it to 4 words. Now, the financial reality, because to understand why this documentary mattered so desperately to the Sussex operation, you need to see the state of things in early 2026. The $100 million Netflix deal had been hanging by a thread. The flagship meant to steady the ship was the lifestyle series with Love, Meghan. Instead, it became the iceberg. The reviews arrived within 24 hours, fast, unanimous, and brutal. The Evening Standard gave it 4 stars and still managed to mock it on the way out. The Times awarded 2 stars and described it, in a phrase worth treasuring, as surely dull. The Daily Telegraph also gave 2 stars and called it an exercise in narcissism, filled with extravagant brunches, celebrity appearances, and thinly veiled business promotion. And then there was The Guardian's. Pay close attention here because The Guardian is no royalist publication. This is a paper that has long favored abolishing the monarchy and has repeatedly condemned the treatment Meghan received. If any British outlet was primed to champion this show, it was them. Rewritten Part 3. The Guardian gave it 1 star and called it toe-curlingly unlovable television. One of their writers went further, suggesting it might be the last thing Meghan ever produces for Netflix. Even the editor at Hello Magazine, the gentlest publication in the kingdom, admitted she could not figure out who the show was actually made for. When the entire spectrum of British media, from Republican broadsheet to Royal Fan Weekly, converges on the same verdict, that is not a review problem. That is a product problem. And here is the detail most coverage skipped past entirely. The harshest judgment did not come from the royalist press. It came from Meghan's natural allies, the people ideologically predisposed to cheer anything that challenges the crown. When your enemies pan you, that is Tuesday. When your friends pan you, that is a verdict. The pattern underneath it is worse than any single review. The couple's debut documentary, Harry and Meghan, remains the most-watched debut in Netflix history. Their follow-up projects, Heart of Invictus and Polo, met a cold, critical response. With Love, Meghan landed even lower. The message from the audience could not be clearer. The world is not interested in Meghan's brunches. The world is interested in royal wounds. The only Sussex content that has ever truly sold is proximity to the crown and to Diana. Which is exactly why, when the lifestyle economy collapsed, the pitch deck reached for the deepest royal wound available. The 5-year, $100 million Netflix arrangement was reportedly due to expire in 2025. A second season of With Love, Meghan has been filmed and is scheduled for autumn, but beyond that, the fog rolls in. The streaming giant has reportedly decided against a full renewal, though other sources insist talks are ongoing. Let us say precisely what can be said. The relationship between Montecito and Netflix is, at minimum, on life support. Royal commentator Ian Pelham-Turner put it plainly, losing Netflix would be a major blow. And the situation inside that Montecito office is brutally simple. A second season already shot, already paid for, heading toward an autumn premiere, while the deal that commissioned it sits expiring on the table. If Season 2 lands the way Season 1 did, there is no Season 3, no pipeline, no platform. That is the cliff edge on which the Diana documentary pitch was standing. It was never one project among many. It was the project, the one card in the deck guaranteed to draw a global audience, because it was the only card printed with a story bigger than their own exit. And the man at Althorpe tore it up with 4 words. Which brings us to the third loop, the letter. And this is where the story stops being about a documentary and starts being about the future of the monarchy itself. Charles Spencer did not make this decision in a vacuum. Sources close to the palace have been quietly describing a relationship most royal watchers have entirely overlooked: the understanding between Diana's brother and Diana's eldest son. It is no secret that Prince William has been privately furious for years about the commercialization of his mother's image. But William operates inside a cage. He is the future king, which means every move he makes creates consequences. He cannot publicly block his own brother's media projects without generating global headlines about palace censorship. When the institution blocks something, it always reads as the establishment protecting itself. But when Diana's own brother, the man who stood at Westminster Abbey and vowed before 2 billion people to protect her sons, calls a project a joke, that is not institutional control. That is family honor. Nobody can spin it. There is no palace to blame. Do you see the elegance of it? The one man free to say no is the one man whose no cannot be weaponized. William never had to lift a finger. There is a term for this in international diplomacy. When 2 governments cannot communicate without losing face, the message travels through a back channel, a private citizen with standing on both sides and a uniform on neither. The envoy can say the unsayable precisely because he holds no office. That is the role Charles Spencer now occupies in this family conflict. Blood ties to both princes, moral authority over Diana's memory, no constitutional position whatsoever. The palace cannot tell Netflix no without a scandal. William cannot tell Harry no without a headline, but the Earl in Northamptonshire can tell everyone no in 4 words over breakfast. And then came the move nobody saw coming. Charles Spencer is said to have written to Prince William urging him to publicly address the worsening crisis between Harry and the royal family. And before anyone reads this as an olive branch, let me stop that idea immediately. This was not about emotional reconciliation. According to insiders, it was about strategy, stability, and protecting the global standing of the British monarchy. The reported contents are striking in their directness. The silence cannot continue. The crown must reclaim its strength. Harry, in the eyes of the international media, has been redefined, no longer the soldier, the prince, the statesman, but a man who appears emotionally reactive and consumed by his wife's narrative. Spencer reportedly warned that this perception has hardened into something permanent, and that by treating Harry with total indifference, the royal family is handing him and Meghan an open microphone, letting them dominate the global story unchecked while traditional royal values are quietly dismantled. Read that carefully. Diana's brother, the man who once stood at her funeral and challenged the Windsors to their faces, is now reportedly urging the future king to defend the crown's image. If you wanted a single sentence to measure how completely Harry and Meghan have rearranged the loyalties of this family, there it is. So where does the public stand? Because a fight like this never stays inside the family. On one side, those who back William and, by extension, Charles Spencer. For them, refusing the documentary is a matter of simple honor. Diana's story has been told and retold. The 30th anniversary should be a moment of quiet reflection, not a content drop with a premiere date. On the other side, Harry's defenders, whose argument deserves a fair hearing. Diana shaped both of her sons equally. Harry has every right to tell the story of his own mother. His perspective on grief, on growing up inside that hurricane, offers something no one else alive can provide. The honest truth sits somewhere messier than either camp admits. But before you choose a side, try standing in both pairs of shoes. Imagine you are William, and the most painful event of your childhood is being scheduled as a streaming release by your own brother's production partners. Now imagine you are Harry, and you are told that the story of your own mother, the woman whose hand you held through hospital wards and homeless shelters, is somehow not yours to tell. Both of those positions hurt, both are entirely human. That is what makes this so genuinely difficult to watch. In that particular frame, there is no villain, rewritten Part 4 final. Only 2 sons, 1 grave. The villain, if you want to find one, lives not in the family, but in the commercial machinery wrapped around the grief. And here is why the temperature around all of this runs so extraordinarily hot. Long before her sons became global headlines, Diana had made herself one of the most consequential figures the modern monarchy ever produced, not through palaces, but through defiance. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when fear and stigma around HIV and AIDS were at their worst, when patients were abandoned and treated as outcasts, Diana walked into the wards and took their hands. She worked with organizations like the National AIDS Trust and the London Lighthouse, dragging global attention toward people the world preferred to ignore. And she took William and Harry with her to homeless shelters, to the hard edges of life beyond the palace gates, because she wanted her boys to grow into men who spent their privilege on other people. That is the inheritance both brothers claim. That is the account everyone keeps trying to draw from. And that is why every documentary, book, and interview that touches her name ignites a national argument. Because for millions of people, Diana is not content, she is conscience. Which brings us to Harry and to the state of the family he left behind. The memoir Spare became the fastest-selling nonfiction title of all time upon its release in January 2023, leaving no stone unturned across his relationships with his father, his brother, and the conflicts his marriage brought into royal life. The Sussexes have returned to the United Kingdom only a handful of times since. And now, according to recent reporting, the royal family is open to peace talks with Harry, but remains deeply reluctant to reconcile with Meghan. Just weeks after Harry sent aides to London to meet with King Charles's communications secretary, the core of the rift has not shifted. According to insiders, it comes down to one word. Trust there is none. The royal family simply does not trust her. The monarch may be open to some resolution with his son, but not by these accounts with his daughter-in-law. Reports suggest the future may involve Harry traveling to the UK alone without Meghan, without Archie and Lilibet. Because the family's greatest fear, and let this land fully, is that any private conversation with her becomes raw material for the next venture she pursues. They are not afraid of her anger, they are afraid of her content calendar. Meanwhile, King Charles has maintained his silence across 5,000 miles. Even as Harry has reportedly offered to share his diary dates with the family, transparency extended even to William and Catherine, who have not spoken to the Sussexes in years. Now let us close every loop in order exactly as promised. But first, the ledger, because when you line up the withdrawals from the Diana account in a single column, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. 2018, the aquamarine ring at the wedding reception. The first borrowing received warmly, then the butterfly earrings, the Cartier watch, the gold bracelets, each one timed to a guaranteed photograph. 2021, the opera interview. The panorama architecture rebuilt to the rafters. Same lighting, same framing, same grammar of a woman silenced by an indifferent institution. Then the Netflix documentary, the hunted couple fleeing the same machine that destroyed Diana, her tragedy reframed as their origin story. And finally, 2026, the request for the vault itself, the diaries, the home movies, Althorpe as a film set, the halo formally fitted to a new head. Watch the escalation. They began by borrowing her jewelry and ended by asking for her soul. Every withdrawal was larger than the last. Everyone was made without consulting the man who keeps the account. And the final one bounced. Loop 1, what was in the pitch? A 30th anniversary Diana documentary for 2027, requesting Althorpe, the private archives, the handwritten diaries, and the unseen home footage, built to position Meghan Markle as the 21st century Diana, pitched at the precise moment the Spotify deal had collapsed, the lifestyle brand was stalling, and the $100 million Netflix arrangement was expiring. Loop 2, why the gatekeeper said no. Because Charles Spencer reportedly carries the guilt of having introduced his sister to Martin Bashir, watched her vulnerability converted into television through forged documents, and quietly vowed that no one, not a journalist, not a network, not a nephew, would ever harvest Diana's pain again. Loop 3, the letter. Far from siding with Harry, Diana's brother reportedly wrote to Prince William urging the future king to break his silence and defend the crown, because in his eyes, Harry is no longer the primary threat. The unchecked story is. And so the question I leave on your table is the one this entire saga has been quietly asking from the beginning. Is it ever acceptable to spend Diana's legacy as currency, even by her own son? Was Charles Spencer right to slam the vault shut? Tell me below. I read everything and I genuinely want to know where you land. But whatever you decide, take this one line with you when you leave. Diana was exploited once by a man with forged documents, and her brother has decided she will not be exploited again by a man with a streaming deal. The vault at Althorpe stays shut. The question now is what a desperate Montecito does next and whether Netflix walks away for good. The moment anything moves, you and I will be the first to talk about it.